Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. My name is Lenny Hanson. I am the Assistant Superintendent for the West Bend School District. I'm glad to be joining you tonight as we present the 106th annual meeting and budget hearing for the district. Before we get into the budget, let's briefly review the purpose of our budget hearing tonight. As it states here, Wisconsin statute requires every school district to prepare a proposed budget, hold a public hearing, and adopt a budget. This is a meeting specifically for the residents of our district so that you can see a broad financial picture of our district, ask questions, and provide input ahead of the final budget adoption by the school board in October. So let's take a look at the agenda for the evening. I want to thank Mr. Zweigert for getting us started. We are currently already at step 4 on this agenda. The next steps are for me to present an overview of the district's budget and tax levy, and then we'll open the floor to any comments before adjourning the hearing. At that point, we will then segue to the annual meeting of the electors. Before we dive into the budget, I want to review the preparation that has led up to tonight. So the information I'm sharing with you tonight is based on the material that was shared with the school board earlier this month. A summary was published in local media in advance of tonight's meeting. Some numbers are still estimates. The state will provide all final figures by October 15th, and those updates will be reflected in the final budget presented to the board in October. At the entrance to the auditorium, you can find various materials, including a budget booklet. For those following along in the booklet, you'll find several things there. First is our district mission and vision, which drive decision-making in our organization, including decisions about resource allocation and budgeting. You'll also find tonight's agenda and the budget publication that appeared in local media sources. On the following pages, you'll find estimates for key data points that will impact this year's budget, as well as some historical context for those figures. Finally, you'll find a listing of our school board members and central office district administration. The district's mission is to prepare all students for college readiness and career success. This has been the mission of the district for well over a decade. The district's vision is one of excellence for all students, ensuring that they can succeed in whatever long-term career and professional goals they may have. The process of school district budgeting takes place over many months. Initial work on the budget begins in the preceding winter and spring. As we discussed with the board this past summer, the budgeting process for school districts in Wisconsin is driven by a somewhat unusual sequence of events. A preliminary budget is approved prior to the start of the new fiscal year on July 1st. However, several pieces of information are not yet known when that approval takes place. This was especially true this year because it is the first year of a new 2-year state biennial budget. The state budget passed by the legislature and signed by the governor controls the revenue for school districts. School districts may not collect more tax revenue than authorized by that state budget. As this timeline shows, the state budget itself was not signed this year until July 4th, which is after both the preliminary budget is approved by the board and the start of the fiscal year. Because of this, districts initially operate using a series of assumptions and estimates. As you can see, tonight's annual meeting is the first major budgeting event of the fall. We are nearing the end of the budgeting process for this year, which will conclude with the adoption of a final budget and certification of the tax levy in October. We will share a lot of information with you tonight. However, before we delve into the numbers, we want to point out a few key highlights. These are topics that are most commonly at the forefront of the minds of our residents when it comes to the district's budget. First, the mill rate, or the amount taxed per $1,000 of property value, is projected to remain flat at $6.14. This is not yet final, but we are cautiously optimistic that this will bear itself out when the final levy is proposed in October. Secondly, the district's fund balance reserves remain healthy, providing the community assurance that the district is well positioned to weather any unforeseen budgetary challenges this year. Third, the district is carefully managing its debt. The community showed great confidence in the district by passing a $106.25 million referendum last November. The administration takes the trust the community has placed in us very seriously. We carefully monitor and manage the district's debt obligations with the help of financial advising partners to ensure that the community's tax dollars are utilized efficiently and effectively. Finally, the 25-26 General Fund 10 budget proposed tonight is a balanced budget. There are 3 primary components that drive the development of the budget. Let's talk briefly about each one of those. Most people think of the first 2 items on this list when they think of a budget: Revenues are the funds coming into the district and can come from a variety of sources. Of course, expenditures represent all of the outflows of dollars from the district. The tax levy is the third part of that equation. That determines how much of the cost for providing the district services will come from local property taxes this year. Next, let's go through a few key variables that factor into each of these components. First, we'll talk about revenues. The district receives revenue from many sources, the two largest being property taxes and state equalization aid. Those revenues are driven by how many students are counted as members of the district. Federal revenues are a third source of revenue, but comparably represent a significantly smaller portion of the district's funds compared to property taxes or state aid. The district also receives revenues from many different grants. Last year, the district managed 31 different grant programs. Some of these provide revenues exceeding $1 million per year, such as the Federal Special Education Flow-Through Grant and the Federal Head Start Grant. Others, like the Title I grant, provide more than $500,000 to the district. The district is primarily funded based on how many students are included in its membership. Membership is similar but different from enrollment. Students who attend part-time or early learning students, for example, are counted on a prorated basis in the membership count. There are several other nuances to membership counting as well. The district is funded based on a 3-year average membership. This approach helps smooth any decreases in enrollment and keeps funding less volatile from year to year. The administration has communicated for many years that we are in a declining enrollment trend, as is much of the state, as is apparent from this chart. We anticipate continuing to be in a declining enrollment environment for several more years before reaching a plateau. Federal revenues most commonly come to the district in the form of grant allocations. The federal government allocated additional funds to school districts during the pandemic. As the administration has shared countless times in the past several years, those funding sources would eventually end, which they now have. Federal grants in other areas have also experienced volatility in recent years. This chart demonstrates the overall reduction in federal revenues to the district over the past few years. As you can see, the expiration of those funds results in a multi-million-dollar reduction in funding. The administration has been long aware of this impending change to funding and created contingency plans for when this time would eventually come. Now let's talk about some of the key expense areas in the annual budget. As with any organization whose purpose is to educate children, our largest expense is staffing, including wages and benefits. After wages, employee insurance benefits represent the district's second largest expense. The cost of insurance, both for employee benefits as well as for things like district liability insurance, often rise at a rate faster than the overall rate of inflation. We all know that inflation has burdened the economy and American consumers for several years now. The district is not immune to the impact of inflation. It affects the prices of most materials and services that the district purchases. The same is true for utilities, which increase for the district just as they do for a homeowner. The state special education reimbursement shortfall has been rising consistently for many years. Each year's shortfall must be covered by the district's general fund at the end of each fiscal year. Last year, the shortfall was more than $9 million, which was transferred from the resources allocated from the General Education Fund allocation in order to cover the state's underfunded reimbursement. I spoke about the impact of inflation on the district. This graph puts that impact into context. Prior to 2009, the state annually ensured that school district per pupil revenue limits would rise with the rate of inflation. However, since 2010, that has not been the case, and the per pupil increase has not met the rate of inflation. This has created a growing gap in funding for all Wisconsin school districts. The blue line on this chart represents the average per pupil revenue limit increase over time. The gray line represents the average rate of inflation over that same time period. As you can see, there is a widening gap over time. Had per pupil amounts kept up with the rate of inflation, which it always had until 2009, the district would have an additional $18 million in spending authority. The district has adapted to this reality through annual adjustments in its budget. This chart shows the size of the annual shortfall by the state to reimburse our school district for special education expenses. If you were watching the state budget news this past summer, you heard that the state increased its allocation for special education funding in the latest biennial budget. While that is true, this graph explains that this increase may not have been as substantial as first thought. As you can see, this year's reimbursement simply returns the funding level back to where it was a few years ago. The state's reimbursement will still cover well under half of the district's costs in this area, and this means that the general fund will still be expected to transfer more than $8 million out in order to cover that shortfall. Next, let's look at some key variables affecting the tax levy. The tax levy is spread across all of the properties in the district. Changes in property value affect how that levy is distributed amongst those properties. The amount of the district's revenues that must be funded by property taxes is driven by how much the state allocates to our community through state equalization aids. So next we'll look at each of these variables one by one. As you can see from this chart, the property tax levy fluctuates yearly, sometimes increasing and other years declining. Property values in the district have been steadily growing for a decade. In fact, the value of property in our district has grown much faster than the state averages. This speaks to the strong health of our local economy. Our district is made up of communities from 9 different municipalities. Some are encapsulated entirely within the district, such as the city of West Bend. Others are split between multiple districts, such as the town of Addison. The segments you see represented on this graph show only the portions of those municipalities that fall within our district's boundaries. This pie chart shows what percentage of the district's property value comes from each municipality. The city of West Bend is where roughly half of the property value in the district is found. However, several other municipalities also provide a substantial amount of property value in the district, with the village of Jackson, town of West Bend, and town of Trenton each individually representing more than 10% of that total value. At the bottom of this chart, you can see the projected total property value of the district is expected to rise from just over $8 billion to $8.7 billion, or a 9.3% increase. This chart helps answer a common question we get from residents. Sometimes residents will ask why their overall taxes may have gone up while the mill rate may have gone down or not changed at all. This is often because the value of properties in one municipality can rise faster than the properties in another. The $6.14 mill rate represents an average of the tax levy spread across all properties in the district. However, if your property value grows at a faster rate than that of a neighboring community within the district, more of the levy ends up allocated to your municipality, which can result in an increase in your tax bill. But at the same time, the property owner in that other municipality would be experiencing a tax bill reduction compared to the prior year due to the fact that their property value has not increased as quickly. So if you look at this chart, you'll see that the property value in the town of Jackson declined last year, whereas the property value in Trenton rose. That means last year, you may have seen a larger percentage increase in your taxes if you lived in Trenton compared to if you lived in the town of Jackson. We do not yet know the final property values for each municipality, so we are unable to project it at this time, but we will know by October 15th. State equalization aid is always the first or second largest source of revenue for the district, so let's review a little bit more about state aid. Equalization aid is intended to partially offset property taxes. Those two revenue sources make up the vast majority of revenues for all school districts in the state. Typically, these two revenue sources have an inverse relationship. When one goes up, the other goes down. This chart shows the amount of aid the West Bend School District has received in each year. As you can see, we are projecting a decrease in state aid this year, which means that the state funding formula will push a larger share of school costs onto property taxes this year as opposed to state aid. That state funding formula is complex, and there are several variables that impact how much revenue the district receives. Unfortunately, districts have virtually no ability to impact how that formula operates. The largest variable impacting the formula is the rate of property value growth. Communities that have higher average property value growth typically receive less aid than districts with lower growth. As our district is expected to have faster than average growth in property value, we are thus expecting to receive less state aid. This chart shows the historical allocation of state aid to all districts across Wisconsin compared to the allocation to the West Bend School District. So if you look, the blue line and left axis show the annual state aid allocation. The red line and right axis show the amount of aid received by the West Bend School District each year. As you can see, while state aid, the blue line, has allocated more money towards the pool of funds available to schools in the past decade, the state funding formula has stopped that aid from resulting in an increase to aid to our community. This again can be largely attributed to the fast-growing property values in the West Bend School District. The mill rate is the amount of taxes collected from a property per $1,000 of property value. As you can see, the mill rate is projected to remain substantially below the long-term historical norm. Even with funds levied to pay for the referendum projects, the $6.14 mill rate would remain more than 20% below what the mill rate had been just 4 years ago. Let's take a brief look at how each of the primary levies included in this year's proposed budget play out. We'll begin with the General Operations Levy. This is the levy for the district's standard operations. These funds flow into the General Fund, sometimes referred to as Fund 10. The General Fund balance is a representation of the net assets of the district's General Operations Fund. This is what people are referring to when you hear them talk about the district's fund balance. Fund balance is made up of a combination of dedicated and unassigned funds. Dedicated funds are dollars allocated for a specific purpose that cannot be used for general operational purposes. These might include things like funds set aside to support the district's self-funded insurance program. Unassigned funds are available for general use purposes. School board policy states that fund balance must fall within a certain range. Final fund balance determinations will not be settled until the financial audit is presented in January, but preliminary indications are that the fund balance will fall within the target range at just over 17%. This graph explains what portion of the total general fund balance is anticipated to be categorized as unassigned versus dedicated for the general use versus dedicated in the fund balance. Next, we'll review the district's levy for long-term debt obligations. But before we get into those details on the debt levy, I want to focus on a few key highlights about this year's levy. As you may know, the district finished levying for all prior debt before placing a referendum question on the ballot last November. The district was able to secure a favorable interest rate on the newly issued debt, which reduced the projected long-term interest costs to our community by more than $8 million. Even with the passage of the November referendum, the district remains well below the maximum allowable debt limit authority. In advance of selling $80 million in bonds last April to fund the referendum construction projects, the district went through a credit rating review process with Standard & Poor's debt rating agency. This review resulted in an upgrade to the district's credit rating. That upgrade placed the district in the top 19% of districts in the state rated by S&P. And that credit rating improvement positively impacted the interest rate we were able to secure. The 4.42% rate secured is a much lower rate than what had been projected during all of our pre-referendum communications. S&P, after the rating call, shared several factors that caused them to upgrade the district's credit rating, including our sound financial practices, healthy fund balance, and effective long-term strategic financial planning. State law sets a district's debt capacity limit at 10% of the district's property value. Even with the passage of the referendum, the district is still utilizing less than a tenth of the allowable debt limit authority, meaning the district is staying well within its means in the management of its debt. This chart shows the district's current principal and interest obligations related to long-term debt. The debt service fund is where the district holds the funds levied for debt in order to be used later to pay debt service obligations. This chart shows the projected activity to take place this year in the fund. Taking care of our buildings is critical as they represent a highly valuable community asset. Therefore, in addition to the referendum construction projects, the district is also continuing to invest in annual capital maintenance at its schools. This is a list of $1.95 million in capital improvement projects that are being funded by the district this year in addition to the referendum projects. The district also maintains Fund 73 for post-employment benefits. These are benefits staff receive in addition to the Wisconsin Retirement System pension program. This chart shows the anticipated activity in the post-retirement benefit fund for 2025-2026. An outside actuarial study is conducted annually to help the district plan for this long-term obligation. The district is well positioned to meet these obligations in the short and long term. Like other school districts, the West Bend School District also provides services under the umbrella of community services. Next, we'll briefly review the expected activity in this area for this year. Community service funds are used for many different purposes, including those listed here. The district shares the cost of school police officers with our partner, the City of West Bend Police Department. Community service funds are also allocated for extracurricular activities and several other programs. The anticipated activity in the Community Service Fund is summarized on this chart. Thank you for your patience and attention as we have quickly summarized the work that goes into the budget and levy development process. In closing, I would like to briefly summarize some highlights before we begin the hearing portion of tonight's meeting. First, a balanced budget is proposed for 2025-2026. The assumptions and estimates used to develop the budget are current as of September 5th, 2025, when the proposal was finalized for the school board meeting on September 8th. These estimates will change in the coming weeks while the final budget is prepared. Enrollment and membership counts are currently underway, and in fact, last Friday was the official statewide third Friday count. All final figures will be released by the state by October 15th, and overall, the administration anticipates the mill rate will not rise this year, but remain flat at $6.14. Again, thank you for your time this evening, and I now turn the microphone back over to our facilitator, Mr. Zweigert, to continue the budget hearing. Thank you.